Good evening, Nigeria, and welcome to yet another edition of Electricity Town Hall, a program being sponsored by the Nigerian Electricity Regulatory Commission, NERC, aimed at keeping consumers of electricity abreast of happenings in the nation's power sector. This program comes your way every Monday on the network service of Radio Nigeria at 7 o'clock in the evening. NERC is the regulator for the nation's power sector, interfacing with the electricity generation companies known as GENCOs, the Transmission Company of Nigeria (TCN), and the distribution companies (DISCOs. I am David Umoru, your anchor. The Nigerian Electricity Supply Industry (NESI) is the framework for electricity generation, transmission and distribution in Nigeria. It's a critical sector that plays a vital role in Nigeria's economic development, fueling industries and improving the standard of living. However, the NESI faces ongoing challenges such as providing reliable and affordable power to a growing population. One area that has remained critical has been the distribution sector, where consumers are given electricity and in turn required to pay for services rendered. Owing to issues surrounding electricity supply, consumption, bills, electricity theft, consumer protection, compliance and enforcement, the federal government has introduced several initiatives geared towards protecting the consumer, while also providing the investor the enabling environment to get returns on their investment. Today we'll be taking a general overview of compliance and enforcement in the Nigerian Electricity Supply Industry (NESI). How much do customers and distribution companies know about compliance and regulations and other service provision in the power sector? These and more will be interrogated tonight on the Electricity Town Hall as we look at compliance and enforcement in the Nigerian Electricity Supply Industry (NESI). We have in the studio a regulatory officer from the Legal Licensing and Compliance Division of NERC, Kelvin Kelters. Welcome to the program.
Thank you, David.
Also with us in the studio is a senior manager, also from the Legal Licensing and Compliance Division of the Commission, Opeyemi Lakunshe. Welcome on board the program also.
Thank you, David. Good evening.
Thank you. So I'll begin tonight with you, Kelvin. What is the Nigerian Electricity Supply Industry, NESI?
So the NESI, as we usually call it, is an acronym for the Nigerian Electricity Supply Industry, and this involves the entire value chain of the electricity framework in the country. So starting with the generation companies, who are usually called GENCOs, they generate electricity. We now have the Transmission Company of Nigeria, who is in charge of transmission of electricity. We now have a new body known as the System Operator, who manages the national grid. You have the bulk trader, which is currently the Nigerian Bulk Electricity Trading Company, MBET. And then you have the distribution companies, who are usually known as the DISCOs. You have the commission itself as the overriding apex regulator of the industry. We also have other partner stakeholders like NEMSA, who manages some certification of electrical appliances. You also have the Rural Electrification Agency that takes care of supply of power to the underserved and unserved. So in summary, that's just what NESI is all about.
Okay, having established that for us this evening, let's get back to the conversation, which is compliance and enforcement. And Opeyemi, I'll come to you with this. What do compliance and enforcement mean in the context of NESI?
Okay, the NESI is a regulated industry. Very, very important that we ensure compliance and enforcement. Now, both concepts, that's compliance and enforcement, they are related, but they play different roles. Compliance, as it connotes, it requires adherence to laws, regulations, rules, directives issued by the Commission. And then, of course, there are different components to it. So we have technical standards, we have requirements. When we issue licenses to licensees, we issue what is called terms and conditions, which contains quite a number of obligations which they are supposed to comply with without prompting. Some are to be done periodically, some are to be done upon request. So you require licensees to comply. What we are looking at is for us to get to a level where licensees comply voluntarily, because you do not want to actually move to the other part. You want to minimize the enforcement aspect of it. So there are a lot of tools that we employ to ensure that there is compliance, right? We're looking at monitoring, we're looking at investigations, and then we're also looking at something we came up with, which is the peer review. Now, the peer review is a program that we came up with to get all licenses in the value chain into one room. So we present what is called the scorecards. Okay. This is how well you are fared in terms of your compliance with these your obligations. And then you get to hear from other licensees what they've done, how they've done it, if they've been able to perform better than you, what lessons can you glean from that. So that's a very important tool we use. Now, when you look at enforcement, it now goes to, at this point, it means there's been a persistent non-compliance, and then you now have to take actions. All right, you have to take remedial or corrective actions. So in the course of this program, we'll be talking about what sort of enforcement powers we have and how we apply them. But what we have to put in mind is that the focus and what we want to achieve is compliance, 100% compliance, without having to resort to enforcement.
Enforcement. Okay, still on that, what powers does the Commission have to regulate and enforce compliance in the NESI?
Okay, so regulators generally derive their powers from the laws establishing them. In this case, we have the Electricity Act of 2023. Just as my colleague had said earlier, we are the apex regulator in the NESI, and we have a number of powers, right? So we can monitor the activities of licensees and sanction them in deserving circumstances. We also have the powers to suspend licenses, to cancel licenses, to remove executive management of licensees in deserving circumstances. If you go through the Electricity Act, we also have the power to impose financial penalties in the event that a licensee persistently refuses to comply with our directives or whatever obligations that they have.
You said enforcement is, so to speak, the last resort, and you ensure compliance 100% so as not to get to the point of enforcement. I'll come to you, Kelvin. How do you monitor, and why is monitoring and ensuring compliance important in NESI?
Okay, thank you, David. The Commission's goal, right, is to ensure compliance first, right? If you look at it, we are regulating a very big service. Electricity is not just a commodity, it's a public service, and you would want all players, all licensees to be compliant at all instances, because you don't want an instance where weak compliance will lead to customer suffering, it will lead to financial instability in the industry, it could also lead to, in some instances, even loss of life. So compliance is very key, because if a disco is very compliant with health and safety codes, for instance, it will lead to reduction in loss of life. You won't have instances of accident, you won't have instances of death. So compliance is very key in the industry, because it will mitigate instances of non-compliance.
Okay, that's on monitoring and ensuring compliance. I'll come to you, Oyemi. How has the compliance been so far?
Of course, we have reports that we release annually, right, and quarterly, which contains records of the compliance and enforcement actions we've taken within that period. So if you go through it, you would see that we have actually achieved quite a lot, especially when it comes to ensuring compliance with obligations to customers, right? So where you have, for instance, discos that have failed to comply with the caps issued for customers that are unmetered. When it comes to billing, right? Usually what we do, apart from asking or directing the discos to issue credit adjustments to customers, we also fine them 5% of the naira value of the energy consumed that's overbilled by the discos. So over time, we have seen that when we review the performance quarterly, we see improvements. So discos who may have billed a high volume of unbilled customers in the last period, when you see them period on period, you see that improvement, you see that reduction, you see steps. In fact, you won't have periods where you find out that there have been no overbilling, within a period.
Meaning they have stayed within the parameters of compliance.
So
apart from billing, overbilling, and a few other things you mentioned. Are there other parameters that you require discos also to comply within? What are some of the services, if we can list them, that you expect them to comply in their operations?
Okay, so because we're talking generally about the NESI, we're not just being restricted to the discos. But I understand the need to talk about discos because they are closest to the people, right? So apart from let's even look at there are some requirements. Like I mentioned earlier, when you look at their terms and conditions, they have requirements to file certain reports, accounting reports, right? Okay. There's a timeline for that, and you expect them because, of course, the industry is also heavily data driven. We need data to be able to take decisions, to know, okay, this is where there's a problem, this is where we fix, and then you'll be able to understand. So there are steps we take to ensure that they file these reports within time. Even when you're dealing with customers now, you're dealing with meters that are obsolete, meters that are faulty, right? And there's a need for discos for time to time. They retrieve those meters and replace them. They're supposed to file those reports with us, right? So these and a lot more we require them to comply with.
Okay, you said something, faulty meters or obsolete meters.
Yes.
How do meters become obsolete?
We have a distribution code that determines how a meter should function.
Okay.
The moment any part of that meter does not align with the requirements in that distribution code and whatever standards have been set by the commission, it is deemed as faulty. So it can either be repaired or replaced, and there's a timeline for that, right? Okay. So discos generally are meant to replace those faulty meters within the timeline set by the commission.
Okay. You're listening to Electricity Town Hall on the network service of Radio Nigeria, a program being sponsored by the Nigerian Electricity Regulatory Commission, NERC. We'll take a short break, and when we return, there'll be more issues to be raised and also answered right here, talking about enforcement process flow, what can trigger enforcement actions in NESI, and all of that. Stay with us, don't go anywhere.
This is Electricity Town Hall on the network service of Radio Nigeria. We will be back shortly.
Power wey dey your house, light wey dey show your road, your safety dey sure every day o. NERC dey your back gidigba to make sure say service dey clear, bills dey straightforward, and that no kurukere billing at all. Even if light no dey, you still get right to sharp response and better communication. No more hidden charges or to cut light anyhow. Na Nigeria Electricity Regulatory Commission (NERC) dey make sure say dem hear your complaint, respect your rights, and make the power truly dey for your hand. For more information, waka enter www.nerc.gov.ng. NERC, make light for the day.
We are back with Electricity Town Hall on the network service of Radio Nigeria.
Thanks for staying with us. It's still Electricity Town Hall on the network service of Radio Nigeria, and we're discussing compliance and enrollment in the Nigerian electricity supply industry, and we're taking a general overview of compliance and enforcement, and we've been speaking with a regulatory officer from the Legal Licensing and Compliance Division of NERC, Kelvin Keltus, and the senior manager from the Legal Licensing and Compliance Division of the Commission, also Opeyemi Lakunse. Thank you so much for joining us on the program this evening.
Thank you, David.
Thank you.
Okay, we'll take off from where we stopped, Opeyemi. What is the Commission's enforcement process flow?
Okay, the Commission's process flow is not quite complicated, because what we look out for is ensuring efficiency in carrying out our tasks, so that you get to you resolve a problem, an issue of non-compliance within the shortest time possible. Earlier on I had spoken about mandatory reporting obligations that licenses are meant to comply with. So not just even discos, but it includes the discos, the GENCOs, the TCN, and the system operator. Now, where they do not meet up with these mandatory reporting obligations, right, it can trigger it begins
The process of enforcement.
the process of compliance
rather.
and enforcement, right? And then again, we can undertake investigations. So we want to find out about the EA or the Electricity Act allows us on our own to make inquiries into the functioning or activities of any of the licensees. It could also come from, it could be maybe a complaint from a customer. It could be a complaint from a shareholder. It could be a complaint from even another licensee, right? So when we receive that, we review, and then we reach out to the licensee concerned. Now, we determine whether there's been an issue of non-compliance. Where there's been an issue of non-compliance, what we do is we direct the licensee to comply. Okay, we issue a warning or we issue a directive. Say, do this within this period of time, rectify this problem within this period of time. Of course, where you establish that there's been no non-compliance, then it ends there. But again, where there is persistent non-compliance, in spite of the fact that you have directed them to take certain steps, then you then go to enforcement. And everything, of course, you have to do it with proportionality. Okay, what enforcement is best for this scenario? Is it penalties? Is it withdrawal of licenses? Is it removal of executive management? And the likes. So there are a whole lot of powers that are available, a whole lot of options that can be explored by the Commission to ensure that the enforcement yields the results.
And already there are set consequences for every violation as
Yes.
it is.
Yeah.
Okay, Kelvin, tell us, what can trigger enforcement actions in NESI?
Okay,
In addition to what Payemi has told us.
okay. Several actions or omissions can trigger, enforcement action. It could be, generally, it will be a breach of, an existing directive of the Commission, maybe a regulation or an order, or a reporting obligation, maybe from the licensee's terms and condition, right? So practically, if you have an instance where there's an electrocution under a disco network, right, there are certain mandatory requirements that a disco is meant to comply with in even setting up its own infrastructure. And this is laid out in the NESI's regulation, the health and safety code, and the distribution code as well. So where usually accidents, more often than not, are upon investigation, because the Commission usually carries out investigations. So usually when we do investigations, you end up seeing clear instances of non-compliance by the distribution company. So with that, it clearly invokes the enforcement powers of the Commission. You also have, non-compliance with, let's say, the capping regulations, right? But you overbill customers above the cap. It also, like my colleague has earlier stated, there's a percentage that you'll be fined, and in addition to credit adjustment that you would do to customers. So several things can invoke the powers of the Commission to enforce its powers on a licensee.
Okay. How about meter deliveries and?
Yeah, so even with meters, right? So in the customer protection regulations outlines timelines for installation of new meters, or even we have other regulations that even outline the timelines for replacement of obsolete meters by the DISCO. So where those timelines are not complied with, and the Commission, either upon a complaint received by a customer or unilaterally on its own, or from reports submitted by the DISCO, because we review, we expect them to file reports with the Commission in terms of certain obligations. So upon any of these instances happening, right, we have the powers of, first of all, compliance, like we have been saying. The DISCO will have to comply initially by even installing those meters before the enforcement will come. So we wouldn't want the customer to suffer while the DISCO is being penalized. So the first step is compliance, then we enforce.
I understand that about 10 states have currently moved on to have their own state forums or state offices or state structure. And now, Talking about NESI, NERC, and compliance monitoring and all, does it still cover these states that have pulled out or that now have their own structures? Does this monitoring and compliance, does it cover those areas too?
Well, for
or
states
out of your jurisdiction?
No, for states that have effectively taken over the regulatory functions. Okay. Of course, when you now go down to monitoring customers, no, we no longer
have
jurisdiction over that, right? So for states that are yet to, yes, we have we keep monitoring, but it's a constitutional matter, and just as we have stated, we have the Electricity Act that has stated at which point our regulatory authority ceases. So where you have the responsibility for ensuring compliance in the intrastate market, that's within the boundaries of the state, it falls on the State Electricity Regulatory Commission.
I think it's a good one to know where the jurisdictions are, just so that we know what compliance, enforcement, and also monitoring, we know the areas this covers. Okay, Opemi, again, I'll ask, can you take us through the enforcement mechanisms that are available to the Commission, or can you just take us through the enforcement mechanisms?
Okay, just like we stated earlier, you have different types of tools that we employ. One of it is issuance of directives, right? Usually they are called rectification directives, which means, just as the name connotes, there's been a breach that requires rectification, and the licensees are expected to comply within the timeline set in in those directives. We also have what is called, we issue most times what is called notice of intention to commence enforcement action. So we are in that directive, we are stating or listing out the breaches committed by the licensees, and the licensee is also supposed to show cause or let us know why enforcement action should not be taken against them. So, in our carrying out our responsibilities, it's also important to ensure that there is fair hearing. That's, you hear from the licensee, this is why I couldn't meet up with this particular standard or this directive. So, based on the outcome of that process, then we can proceed to complete or conclude the enforcement or just end it here. As at first quarter 2025, we issued 21 rectification directives, and we also issued 18 notices of intention to commence enforcement action for different breaches, and we are glad to say that it yielded the positive results that we intended.
Okay, finally, let's just talk about the feedback mechanisms and also areas that the Commission try to engage with all the stakeholders involved to just keep an eye on the general operation of things. What are some of the avenues that the Commission interact with stakeholders? Are there forums? Are there, like for this now we have a town hall. Are there other town halls? Are there other platforms where they interact to also get feedbacks from stakeholders?
Okay, so yeah, the Commission, in trying to ensure that the entire NESI is carried along, we have the NESI Stakeholders Forum, where we usually meet probably quarterly, depending on the exigencies, where issues that are very critical to the sector are discussed by all the players, where if there are any challenges, it's been discussed, and that way it's a feedback mechanism so that we see what the operators are saying and we are able to, it helps our decision making. So we have that forum.
Thank you so much, and I'm sure this will, okay.
Earlier I also mentioned the peer review meetings. We also have town halls meetings, fiscal town hall meetings held in states, where mostly the customers and discos and the commission staff are put together in one room, and then issues are resolved. So it's another process of also enlightening customers and ensuring prompt resolution of complaints.
Thank you very much for the very insightful contribution this evening. And this is where we end today's edition of Electricity Town Hall on the network service of Radio Nigeria, being sponsored by the Nigerian Electricity Regulatory Commission, NERC. And I've been speaking with a regulatory officer from the Legal Licensing and Compliance Division of NERC, Mr. Kelvin Keltus. Thank you so much for joining us on the program.
Thank you for having me, David.
Also with us has been a senior manager, also from the Legal Licensing and Compliance Division of the Commission, Opeyemi Lakonshe. Thank you very much for coming on the program also.
Thank you, David.
Thank you all once again for insightful contribution and for coming on the show tonight. Appreciation to the production team, studio manager Rosemary Krisungu, facilitator Conrad Labi, producer Sunday Goche. Special thanks to our executive producer Soshima Key. I'm David Umoru. See you next Monday for another interesting edition of Electricity Town Hall. Goodbye.